He chose the Maid. In a luxury penthouse filled with a lifetime of expectations, a son looked at his mother's furious finger pointing at the door, looked at the quiet woman holding his child's hand, and made a decision that shattered a fundamental Korean rule. This is about more than a single argument. It is about the moment a family's silent contract breaks, and what happens when filial piety is replaced by a different, more dangerous kind of loyalty. At the center is Kang Min-jun, heir to a billion-dollar empire, his mother, the formidable Madame Kang, and Evelyn, the Caribbean nanny who became the unexpected fault line. This isn't just a family drama. It's a real-time collision between ancient duty and a modern, painful love. So how does a son become willing to lose everything, to choose an outsider over the woman who gave him his name? The answer starts not with a shout, but with a whisper 4 months earlier. Evelyn Grant arrived at the Kang penthouse on a rain-soaked April morning with $37 in her pocket, a 2-year visa, and a secret. She was 28, from Kingston, Jamaica, a trained pediatric nurse who couldn't get a nursing license in Seoul. The agency said childcare specialist. The reality was a live-in nanny for Min-jun's 5-year-old daughter, Soo-min. The penthouse was a monument to silent wealth. 3 floors, a private elevator, windows that looked down on the Han River as if it were a decorative pond. Her room was in the servants' wing, small, pristine, with a window facing a concrete wall. Madame Kang, born Jaeyeon, held court in the sun-drenched main living room. At 64, she was a figure of elegant severity, her black hanbok tailored to perfection, her hair in a flawless chignon. A widow of 7 years, she had steered the Kang family holdings after her husband's death with a will of iron. Her love for her only son, Min-jun, was the central fact of her life, and it was a possessive, shaping force. Evelyn's first directive came not from Min-jun, but from his mother. You care for the child, you do not offer opinions, you do not enter the main living areas unless summoned. You are a shadow, do you understand? Evelyn nodded. Yes, ma'am. But shadows don't make a child laugh. Shadows don't notice when a little girl's smile doesn't reach her eyes. Soo-min was quiet, polished like a small precious stone. She called Evelyn Ebby because Evelyn was too difficult. The first crack in the wall happened in week 2. Soo-min had a nightmare. Evelyn heard the whimper through the monitor, a sound the housekeeper would have ignored. She went to her, held her, sang an old Jamaican lullaby her own grandmother used to sing. The next morning, Madame Kang found them asleep in the nursery chair, Soo-min's head on Evelyn's chest. She said nothing, but that afternoon, a new, softer blanket appeared in Soo-min's room. Min-jun was a ghost in his own home. 40 years old, running a conglomerate, his life a spreadsheet of meetings and obligations. He saw his mother for dutiful dinners, saw his daughter for a bedtime story that often felt like a checklist item. He approved Evelyn's hiring on a recommendation from his secretary. He didn't meet her for the first 9 days. When he did, it was an accident. He came home early, exhausted, and heard laughter from the closed nursery. He pushed the door open. Evelyn was on the floor, building a fantastically unstable block tower, Soo-min giggling as it wobbled. "Appa," Soo-min cried, and for the first time in months, ran to him, not with a formal bow, but with a genuine, impulsive hug. He looked over her head at Evelyn. She stood, smoothing her simple dress. "Mr. Kang, I'm sorry, we were just—" "She's laughing," he interrupted, his voice quiet. "She doesn't usually laugh." Something passed between them in that glance. Not recognition, not yet, but the faintest signal that this woman was having an effect his money had never purchased. Madame Kang observed it all. She saw the new lightness in her granddaughter. She saw the way her son's eyes lingered a second too long on the nursery door, and she felt the first cold trickle of displacement. The tests began. A misplaced hairpin in Evelyn's room was discovered by the housekeeper. A question about Evelyn's visa paperwork, implying error, small, precise pressures. Evelyn bore them with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Madame Kang more than defiance would have. The bond between Evelyn and Soo-min deepened. She taught her patois phrases. They cooked simple jerk chicken in the staff kitchen, the smells of allspice and Scotch bonnet pepper weaving through the sterile air. Min-jun started finding reasons to be home. He'd wander into the kitchen, pretending to need water, listening to the sounds from the nursery. One evening, he found Evelyn alone sorting toys. "She talks about you constantly," he said. Evelyn kept sorting. "She's a wonderful girl. She just needed permission to be one." Permission from who? From everyone. She finally looked at him. "Including you." No one spoke to Kang Min-jun like that. Employees, rivals, even his mother couched criticism in layers of respect. This was direct, gentle, and utterly disarming. He didn't get angry, he just stood there. And in that silence, a bridge was built, one his mother could sense from across the apartment. The crisis that changed everything was medical. Sumin spiked a terrifying fever. It was 2 in the morning. The house doctor was unreachable. Minjun was in Tokyo on business. Madame Kang, faced with a crying, burning child, froze. It was Evelyn who took charge. Her nurse's training surfaced, calm and absolute. Cool baths, precise dosages of medication, hours of holding and monitoring. She didn't sleep. When Minjun's private jet landed at dawn and he rushed home, he found Evelyn asleep in a chair by Sumin's bed, his daughter sleeping peacefully, her forehead cool. His mother stood in the doorway, a statue of helpless irrelevance. He didn't go to his mother. He walked to Evelyn, placed a hand on her shoulder. She woke instantly. "She's okay," Evelyn whispered. "She's okay." In that moment, Minjun didn't see an employee. He saw the woman who had fought for his child. He saw the person who had been where he was not. The gratitude was so profound it felt like vertigo. From that night, the alignment shifted. Minjun began consulting Evelyn on matters about Sumin's school, her activities. He asked for her opinion, and he started to talk to her, not as a boss but as a person. He spoke of the pressure of the company, the loneliness of his position, things he had never confessed to his mother, who saw vulnerability as a flaw. Madame Kang watched her son's soul, which she had guarded so fiercely, begin to open to another woman, and the woman was a hired helper from a Caribbean island. The jealousy was no longer cold. It was volcanic. She confronted Minjun. "You are blurring lines that should be iron walls. She is the help." His reply was quiet, final. "She saved your granddaughter's life. She sees me. Can you say the same?" It was the first time he had ever questioned her love. The wound was mortal. Madame Kang didn't fire Evelyn. That would have been too direct, too easily reversed by her son. She devised a more elegant punishment. She would make Evelyn choose to leave. She began a campaign of exquisite cruelty. She would overrule every one of Evelyn's decisions for Sumin in front of the child. She hired a strict, traditional Korean tutor to replace Evelyn's playful lessons. She spread a rumor to the other staff that Evelyn was angling to become the mistress of the house. The atmosphere turned toxic. Evelyn endured for Sumin's sake, but Minjun saw the strain. The final straw for him was a Saturday afternoon. He heard raised voices from the salon. His mother was criticizing Evelyn's braiding of Sumin's hair, calling it unkempt and wild. Evelyn, usually so composed, had tears of frustration in her eyes. Sumin was crying. Minjun walked in, took his daughter's hand and looked at his mother. "From now on," he said, his voice like steel, "Evelyn's decisions regarding my daughter are final. You will not countermand them. You will not speak to her that way again." The room went silent. He had not just defended Evelyn. He had publicly stripped his mother of her authority in her own domain. He had chosen sides, and everyone in the room knew it. That evening, Madame Kang issued her ultimatum. She summoned Minjun to her private sitting room. The setting was formal, a tea service between them like a diplomatic negotiation gone wrong. "You will dismiss her," she said, no emotion in her voice, "or I will withdraw my shares from the family trust. The board will question your control. Your position will become untenable." It was a nuclear option. Her shares were the bedrock of his corporate power. Minjun stared at her, seeing not his mother, but a CEO executing a hostile takeover. "Why?" he asked, the word hollow. "Because I will not be replaced in my own son's heart by a paid stranger. Because everything I built, everything I sacrificed for was for you, and you are giving it away to her." He left the room without answering. He went to the nursery. Evelyn was putting Sumin to bed. He stood in the doorway, watching this woman who had brought light and chaos into his gilded cage. He thought of his mother's threat, the empire he was expected to protect. He thought of his daughter's laugh. He thought of the quiet dignity in Evelyn's eyes, a strength that asked for nothing but respected everything, and he knew his next decision would detonate his world. The confrontation in the living room, the one from the hook, wasn't an argument. It was a verdict. Madame Kang, having received no answer, marched to the nursery to expel Evelyn herself. Minjun intercepted her in the grand living room. Evelyn, holding Sumin's hand, stood frozen. "She goes. Now," Madame Kang demanded, her finger pointing to the door. Minjun looked at his mother's fury. He looked at Evelyn's calm, resigned expression. He looked at his daughter's small hand clutching Evelyn's fingers. He stepped forward, placing his body between his mother and the woman she wanted gone. The vase shattered not from a thrown object, but from the seismic force of the choice he had already made in his heart. And in that crystal-littered silence, with his mother's world breaking behind her eyes, he spoke the words that would redefine his life. He didn't shout, he didn't plead. Kang Min-jun simply looked at his mother and said, "She stays." Those two words were the detonation. Madame Kang's fury didn't explode. It crystallized into something far more dangerous. She turned without another word, her heels clicking a cold, retreating rhythm on the marble. The war was declared in silence. The first missile struck the next morning. Min-jun's chief counsel called him at 5:45 a.m. "The board has called an emergency meeting for 10 a.m. Your mother's trust has filed a notice of intent to divest." She had done it. Overnight, she had initiated the process to pull her 28% stake, the controlling block, out of the Kang Holdings operating trust. It wasn't just a financial blow. It was a signal to every rival, every underling, that the family fortress was crumbling from within. The board meeting was a bloodless coup. Min-jun sat at the head of the table, facing 7 men who owed their positions to his family. His mother was not present, but her presence dominated the room. The questions were polite, lethal. "Can you assure us of continued stability? How do we manage the perception of a family rift?" The word perception was used 11 times. It meant scandal. Min-jun held his ground, citing his track record, the company's performance. But performance doesn't matter when the foundation is shaking. They voted to form a stability committee, a polite term for a group to oversee his decisions. He had just been put on probation by his own board. He returned to the penthouse that evening, the taste of ash in his mouth. Evelyn was waiting in his study. She had heard the news from the terrified housekeeper. "I should go," she said, her voice steady but her eyes raw. "This is destroying everything you've built." Min-jun poured a glass of water, his back to her. "If you go, she wins, and Soo-min loses the only person who sees her as a child, not an heir." "And you?" Evelyn asked. He turned. "I lose the only person who sees me as a man, not a CEO." It was the closest he had come to a declaration. The space between them hummed with everything unsaid, but the house was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield. Madame Kang's campaign shifted from ultimatums to insidious pressure. She didn't speak to Evelyn at all. She spoke through her. Instructions for Soo-min were left as notes. Meals Evelyn prepared for the girl were accidentally cleared by the staff before she could eat them. The message was clear: "You have no place here, not even as a servant." The most painful weapon was turned on Soo-min. Madame Kang began a series of special grandmother days, lavish outings from which Evelyn was explicitly excluded. She would return the child overloaded with toys, whispering, "Grandmother says real ladies don't get their hands dirty in the kitchen," a direct rebuke of the cooking lessons with Evelyn. Soo-min became confused, withdrawn, caught in a loyalty tug-of-war she was too young to understand. Min-jun watched his daughter retreat, and his anger hardened into a cold, strategic resolve. He couldn't fight his mother with emotion. He had to fight her with the law. He summoned his private investigator, a man named Park who handled the family's most delicate matters. "I need a full, forensic-level audit of my mother's financial affairs for the last 5 years. Every transfer, every shell company, every donation. And I need to know everything about the circumstances of my father's will and the trust structure." He was looking for leverage, a flaw, a vulnerability, something to make her stand down. While Park worked in the shadows, the public facade began to crack. A society columnist for a major Korean newspaper published a coy, unnamed item about a certain conglomerate heir causing heartbreak for his revered mother over a domestic staffing matter. The comment sections, seeded by anonymous accounts, filled with outrage. How dare he choose a foreign nanny over his own mother? Filial piety is dead. The narrative was being written, and Min-jun was cast as the villain. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. She tried to go to the market one afternoon and was recognized by a woman who spat the word homewrecker under her breath. Her visa sponsorship was through Kang Holdings. If Min-jun fell, her legal right to stay in the country evaporated. She was trapped in the penthouse, a prisoner of the very choice meant to free her. Then, the second missile hit. Min-jun received a sealed envelope delivered by his mother's personal driver. Inside was not a letter, but a photograph. A grainy, long-lens image of Evelyn taken the week prior, entering a modest apartment building in Itaewon. On the back, in his mother's precise handwriting, was an address and a single word: investigate. Min-jun's blood ran cold. Was there a secret, a lover? Everything he thought he was building felt suddenly precarious. He gave the photo and address to Park. Discreetly, "I need to know who she was visiting." The weight was agony. He avoided Evelyn, fear and shame twisting inside him. When Park's report came, it reframed everything. The apartment belonged to a Mrs. Choi, an elderly Korean widow with advanced multiple sclerosis. Evelyn had been visiting her twice a week for 3 months, providing unpaid respite care, bathing her, reading to her. She had found the woman through a volunteer network, paying for the taxi there and back out of her own salary. Park included a statement from a stunned home health aide. She never gave a last name, just said her grandmother had been sick and she missed caring for someone. Minjun sat in the dark, the report in his hands. This was her secret, not a betrayal but a testament. While his mother schemed for power, Evelyn was washing the body of a stranger. The contrast was so devastating it felt like a physical blow. He went to find her. She was in the nursery, organizing books. He held up the photo. Her face went pale, then set with a defiant resignation. "You were having me followed." "My mother had you followed," he corrected, his voice rough. "Who is she, Evelyn?" "Why?" Evelyn looked away out the window. "Her name is Haesuk. Her family is in Busan. They send money but they don't send time. My gran, she was alone at the end. I know what that does." She finally looked at him, her eyes clear. "You asked me once what I was doing here. That's what I'm doing. Anywhere, that's all I've ever done." In that moment, Minjun didn't just love her, he revered her. And he knew with absolute certainty that his mother would never understand this, would only see it as weakness to be exploited. He had to move. The legal pivot came from Park's financial audit. Buried in a maze of transactions was a recurring anomaly. For 3 years, a small but consistent stream of funds, inconsequential to the total wealth, but significant in pattern, had been diverted from a charitable foundation chaired by Madame Kang to a private consulting firm in Singapore. That firm, upon deeper digging, was owned by a cousin of Madame Kang's late husband, a man with a history of bad debts and shady deals. It wasn't embezzlement on a grand scale, but it was a breach of fiduciary duty, a stain on her impeccable reputation. It was the leverage Minjun needed. He confronted his mother, not in the penthouse, but in her formal office at the Kang Foundation. He laid the transaction records on her desk. "Explain these." She glanced at them, her face a mask of cold amusement. "You are digging through garbage to find a reason to hate me. These are administrative fees, approved. Approved by you for the benefit of a known financial risk. If this reaches the board's audit committee or the press, your moral authority vanishes. You become just another greedy keyboard matriarch." For the first time, he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had underestimated him. She thought this was about emotion. He was showing her it was about evidence. "What do you want?" she hissed. "3 things. You halt the trust divestment immediately. You publicly reaffirm your confidence in my leadership. And you leave Evelyn Grant alone. You will not speak to her. You will not interfere with her work. You will not look in her direction." "Or what? You'll ruin me with this," she said, gesturing at the papers. "No," Minjun said, standing. "I will forgive you for it. But I will also take Sumin and we will move out of the penthouse and you will see your granddaughter only under supervised visitation. You will be alone in your victory." He had found her true pressure point, not her reputation, but her fear of total exile. The color drained from her face. She said nothing. He took her silence as surrender. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He returned home, believing he had won a brutal but decisive round. He told Evelyn the immediate threat was over. For a few days, a fragile calm descended. The staff stopped their cold shoulders. Sumin tentatively returned to her old self. Minjun began to make plans, real plans, for a future that included Evelyn not as staff, but as family. He consulted a discreet immigration attorney. He looked at properties. He allowed himself to hope. Madame Kang's surrender, however, was a tactical retreat. She had merely shifted her artillery. A week after their confrontation, Minjun's phone lit up with a call from his public relations chief. His voice was panicked. "So you need to see the news, now." On screen was a popular current affairs program. The segment was titled "The Nanny and the Heir, a Threat to Korean Values." They used the grainy photo of Evelyn entering the Itaewon apartment, but the narrative was twisted. The voiceover suggested she was visiting a mystery man, that her secret liaisons proved her untrustworthiness. They then cut to a tearful, anonymous interview with a former staff member who claimed Evelyn was manipulative and drove a wedge between a devoted mother and son. It was a character assassination, executed with surgical precision. The show then brought on a family ethics professor who solemnly intoned about the collapse of filial piety and the dangers of foreign influences in the home. The studio audience nodded. The host clucked with disapproval. Evelyn, watching on a tablet in her room, felt the world dissolve. This was no longer a private fight. She had become a national villain. Minjun was furious, but also blindsided. He issued a cease and desist, demanded a retraction. The network lawyers replied with smug letters, citing freedom of the press, their reliable sources. The damage was done. The board's stability committee scheduled another emergency meeting. Min Jun's personal life was now a corporate liability. The final devastating blow came from where he least expected it. The doorbell rang. Standing in the private elevator foyer were two officials from immigration. They were polite, firm. They were there to speak with Evelyn Grant regarding her visa status. They had received an anonymous tip, they said, with evidence suggesting her nursing qualifications were fraudulent, that she had misrepresented her professional history to gain entry. This was his mother's masterstroke. She wasn't attacking him directly anymore. She was having Evelyn dismantled, piece by piece, by the state itself. As Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her passport in her trembling hands, answering the officials' precise questions, Min Jun realized the terrible truth. He could fight his mother in the boardroom. He could fight her in the media, but he could not fight the full, cold machinery of the law that she had quietly set in motion. He had won a battle over financial documents. She was now winning the war for Evelyn's very existence in the country. And as he watched the woman he loved being systematically erased, he knew he had one move left, a move so drastic it would burn every bridge behind him forever. The immigration interview was a quiet, bureaucratic dismantling. They didn't yell, they didn't accuse. They just asked questions, their pens scratching notes, while Evelyn's future bled out onto the kitchen table. The allegation was specific. Her nursing diploma from a Kingston college was claimed to be forged. The anonymous tip had included what looked like official transcripts with inconsistent seals. Min Jun's lawyer, present but powerless, could only watch. Evelyn answered calmly, explaining the college's merger, the change in administrative seals. But doubt, once planted by a government official, grows like a weed. They left with copies of all her documents and a promise of a follow-up interview. Her visa was now under active review. She was effectively grounded. Min Jun's rage was a silent, vibrating thing. He knew with absolute certainty the forged documents were his mother's creation. A skilled forger could have made them. But proving it was impossible. This was her genius, attacking through faceless systems he couldn't threaten or negotiate with. His countermove was drastic. He called an emergency press conference, not through his corporate PR team, but standing alone on the steps of Kang Holdings headquarters. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. He held no notes. "My name is Kang Min Jun. For weeks, there have been lies in the media about my family and about a member of my household, Evelyn Grant. She is not a mystery woman. She is a caregiver who saved my daughter's life. The allegations about her credentials are false and part of a malicious campaign. I am here to state unequivocally that I fully support her, and I am here to announce that I am voluntarily stepping aside from all operational duties at Kang Holdings, effective immediately, until this private matter is resolved and my family's name is no longer a corporate distraction." The heir left the plaza. The CEO of a $1 trillion company had just abdicated to defend a nanny. It was unprecedented. It was insane. It was the ultimate signal that his priorities had permanently shifted. The board was apoplectic. The stock price began to fall the second the markets reopened, but Min Jun didn't care. He had drawn a line in the sand with his own career. His mother watched the broadcast from her sitting room, her face a mask. She had not anticipated this. She thought he would choose the company. He had chosen the woman. Her war was no longer about winning him back. It was about ensuring he lost everything for his choice. The public reaction was a tidal wave of contempt. The narrative solidified. A weak son, bewitched by a foreign gold digger, destroying his family's legacy. Traditionalist groups organized small protests outside the Kang offices. Memes mocked him. Evelyn, trapped inside, saw it all online. The weight of what he had sacrificed for her was suffocating. She packed a single bag. She would turn herself in to immigration, withdraw her visa application, and leave. It was the only way to stop the bleeding. Min Jun found her in the foyer, bag at her feet. "If you leave," he said, his voice stripped raw, "she wins by making me a liar. I told the world I was standing by you. If you run, it proves I was a fool. Don't make me a fool, Evelyn, make me right." It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said. She put the bag down, but the pressure found a new, cruel outlet. Sumin's prestigious international preschool called. Given the media attention, the headmistress said with polite regret, it would be best for Sumin to take a temporary leave of absence, for her own well-being. The child was being expelled by association. That night, Sumin cried herself to sleep, confused about why she couldn't see her friends. Evelyn held her, humming the lullaby, her own heart breaking. Minjun stood outside the door, listening to the two most important people in his world in pain, and he felt a fury so pure it was almost peaceful. He needed a weapon, not a financial one, a moral one. He went back to his investigator, Park. The charity funds were start. I need more. I need something on my mother that isn't about money. I need to know who she is when no one is looking. Park, to his credit, didn't blink. I'll need to look at her past, the years before your father. Look. While Park delved into history, the immigration battle escalated. A formal notice arrived. Evelyn's visa was revoked pending a full appeal. She had 30 days to leave the country or be deported. Minjun's legal team filed an immediate appeal, a process that could take months, but the stain was permanent. Then, the knife twisted. A popular online news outlet published a deep-dive investigative piece. The headline, "The Nanny's Past, Questions in Kingston." It quoted former neighbors in Jamaica who vaguely recalled family troubles and a local source who suggested Evelyn had left under a cloud of debt. It was all smoke, no fire, but expertly crafted to imply hidden disgrace. The article ended with a quote from a family values advocate asking, "Is this the influence we want around our most vulnerable children?" The subtext was clear. She was a corrupting influence. Madame Kang had outsourced her cruelty to the court of public opinion, and the verdict was in. Minjun was now fighting a hydra. Cut off one head, the board, and two more, the media, immigration grew in its place. He was running out of moves. Then Park called. He asked to meet in person, somewhere absolutely private. They met in a closed-top parking garage in Park's car. The investigator's usual calm was gone. He looked pale. "I found something. It's not what you asked for, it's bigger. And it's not about your mother, it's about your father." Minjun's blood went cold. Park handed him a thin folder. Inside were photocopies of old hospital records from 42 years ago. Patient Kang Jae-hoon, Minjun's father. Admission date, a month before Minjun's birth. Diagnosis, severe oligospermia, extremely low sperm count, likelihood of natural conception termed virtually impossible. Attached was a sworn affidavit from a retired fertility clinic secretary, her identity protected, stating that Madame Kang, then Jae-yoon, had undergone intrauterine insemination at a clinic in Osaka, Japan, around that time, using an anonymous donor. The timeline matched. Minjun stared at the papers, the words swimming. The silent garage roared in his ears. Park spoke quietly. "The records were sealed, the clinic in Japan destroyed in an earthquake years ago. Your mother's family paid a fortune to keep this buried. The only reason I found it was tracing the money from her charity to that cousin. He wasn't just skimming, he was blackmailing her for decades. These were his insurance documents." Minjun was not his father's biological son. The entire foundation of his identity, the Kang heir, the continuation of the bloodline, was a meticulously crafted lie. His mother's relentless control, her obsession with his compliance, her volcanic reaction to his independence, it wasn't just about love or power. It was about protecting the secret that legitimized her position and his. Everything she had done, the cruelty, the scheming, the war against Evelyn, was to protect the fiction that he was a true Kang. Because if he was not, he had no right to the empire, and she had no right as the mother of the heir. In that moment, his entire life rewrote itself in his mind. He felt a staggering vertigo, followed by a tidal wave of grief for the father who had loved him unconditionally, never knowing. And then, a clarifying, ice-cold rage. His mother had made him a pawn in her fiction. She had used this secret to control him, to shape him, and when he threatened to live a real life, she was willing to destroy him to protect the lie. He looked at Park. "Does she know you have this?" "No, the cousin died last year. I found this in a safety deposit box he'd rented under a fake name. I believe your mother thought it died with him." Minjun closed the folder. The power dynamic had just inverted. He now held the truth that could annihilate her world, her social standing, her very identity. But wielding it would also annihilate his father's memory and his own place in the world. It was a nuclear option with a yield that would destroy everything, including himself. He went home, the folder burning a hole in his briefcase. Evelyn saw his face, the hollowed-out look in his eyes. What happened? He couldn't tell her, not yet. The secret was too vast, too toxic. He just shook his head and held her, needing the anchor of her real, uncomplicated goodness. That night his mother summoned him, not to the penthouse, but to the family's old hanok in Bukchon, the traditional house that represented their lineage. It was a deliberate setting. She was sitting in the main hall, dressed in a formal hanbok, as if presiding over a ritual. "You have humiliated this family beyond repair." she began, her voice like silk over steel. Your father would be ashamed. Your defiance ends now. You will publicly apologize, reinstate yourself at the company, and dismiss that woman. You will do this within 48 hours, or I will take the final step. Min-jun felt the weight of the folder in his mind. He looked at this woman, this architect of his life's greatest lie. What final step? I will file for custody of Su-min, she said, her eyes utterly cold. I will argue that your immoral relationship and unstable position make you an unfit father. The courts will listen to a grandmother of impeccable standing over a CEO who abandoned his post for a foreign nanny. You will lose your daughter. It was the unthinkable, the one threat he could never withstand. She had found his absolute breaking point. He saw in her eyes that she knew she had won. She believed he would crumble. All the financial threats, the media attacks were just prelude. This was the checkmate. Min-jun took a deep breath. The chaos in his mind settled into a terrible, clear resolution. He could not fight this with a secret. He could not fight it with lawyers alone. He had to fight it with a truth so powerful it would shatter her credibility forever. But to do that, he would have to step into the abyss. He looked at his mother, not with anger, but with a profound, final pity. You should have loved me more than you loved the lie, he said softly. Then he turned and walked out of the hanok, leaving her in the silent, ancient house. He knew what he had to do. He would not reveal the secret of his paternity. To do so would be to betray his father. Instead, he would reveal her. He would weaponize every cruel act, every manipulation, every ounce of evidence Park had gathered. He would go public with the full, ugly story of her campaign, not as a family dispute, but as a case of systematic abuse and fraud. He would make the world see the woman behind the matriarch. It would be the end of the Kang family's pristine image. It might be the end of the company, but it was the only way to save his daughter and the woman he loved. He got in his car, the lights of Seoul blurring around him. He called his public relations chief, the one who had stayed loyal. Clear the schedule for tomorrow, book the biggest press venue you can find, and call every major outlet, domestic and international. Tell them Kang Min-jun is not resigning, he is declaring war. The line was crossed. The point of no return was now in the rearview mirror. The private family tragedy was about to explode into a very public, very brutal reckoning. The press conference was not held in a corporate boardroom. It was held in a public hall, and Kang Min-jun made sure every seat was filled. He stood at the podium, not as a disgraced heir, but as a prosecutor. Evelyn was not there. Su-min was not there. This was his burden alone. He began not with an apology, but with a question. What does a mother owe her child? The room was silent. For 32 years, I believed the answer was everything. Today, I stand here to tell you what that everything cost. He did not mention the paternity file in his briefcase. That secret would die with him, a final act of loyalty to the father who raised him. Instead, he weaponized the truth his mother thought was safe. Large screens behind him flickered to life. He started with the financial records, the diverted charity funds, the blackmail payments to the cousin. He presented them not as a crime, but as a pattern of corruption hiding behind a facade of propriety. Then, he played the audio, a cleaned-up, crystal-clear recording of his mother's ultimatum in the hanok. Her cold voice filled the room. I will file for custody of Su-min, you will lose your daughter. The gasp from the audience was audible. He followed with a curated, devastating slideshow. The grainy photo of Evelyn entering the Itaewon apartment, followed by a smiling picture of the elderly Mrs. Choi, then a sworn statement from the home health aide about Evelyn's unpaid care. The narrative of the secret liaison evaporated, replaced by one of selfless compassion. He then displayed the forged nursing diploma alongside the real one, with an explanation from the Jamaican college registrar verified by the embassy. The anonymous tip was exposed as a malicious fraud. Finally, he showed the media timeline. The initial Society column item, the televised smear piece, the online investigative article, all published within days of his mother's failed ultimatums. He didn't accuse her of calling the reporters. He just showed the sequence. The conclusion was inescapable. For the coup de grace, he did something no Korean keyboard heir had ever done. He showed vulnerability. His voice broke. She threatened to take my child because I loved someone she deemed unworthy. She tried to destroy a woman whose only crime was caring for my daughter and for a sick stranger out of the goodness of her heart. My mother taught me that family is everything, but she defined family as control. I am here to redefine it as choice. I chose Evelyn, I choose my daughter, and I am choosing to tell the truth no matter what it costs me. He took no questions. He walked off the stage. The silence lasted a full 3 seconds before the room erupted. The story was no longer about a scandal. It was about a systemic betrayal. The media cycle, so easily manipulated against him, now turned with the force of a tidal wave. The same outlets that ran the smear pieces now raced to publish exposes on the Kang matriarch's web. The court of public opinion issued a swift, brutal verdict. Madame Kang's world imploded within 24 hours. The Kang Foundation board demanded her resignation. Her charitable partnerships dissolved. Her name was stripped from a university library wing. The social invitations stopped. The phone stopped ringing. She became a ghost in her own penthouse. The institutional consequences were just as swift. The immigration authority, facing intense public scrutiny and presented with the evidence of forgery, reinstated Evelyn's visa within 48 hours and issued a formal apology for the procedural distress. The preschool called, full of contrition, begging for Sumin to return. The board of Kang Holdings, terrified of the ongoing scandal and seeing Min Jun's public sympathy, voted unanimously to reinstate him as CEO with enhanced powers to reorganize the trust. He had won, but the victory felt like ash. He returned to the penthouse. His mother had not left. She was in her sitting room staring out at the city she no longer commanded. Min Jun entered. She didn't turn. "Was it worth it?" she asked, her voice hollow. "To destroy me." "You were destroying us," he said. "I just turned the lights on." She finally looked at him. The elegance was gone. She looked old, brittle. "I did it all for you, to protect your place, to make you strong. You made me a prisoner and you tried to make me a monster." A long silence stretched between them, filled with 40 years of distorted love. "What happens now?" she whispered. Min Jun had already decided. He would not cast her out. That would make him as cruel as she had been. But there would be new walls. "You will have an apartment in the building. You will have access to Sumin under supervised visits at Evelyn's discretion. You will have no role in the company and no contact with the press. You will live quietly. If you accept these terms, you will be provided for. If you contest them, I will release the full, unedited financial audit to the prosecutors." It was a life sentence of comfortable irrelevance. She bowed her head, the fight utterly extinguished. The woman who pointed at the door was gone. The final, surprising twist came 2 weeks later, from an unexpected quarter. Min Jun received a call from Mrs. Choi's daughter in Busan. The woman was in tears. She had seen the news, recognized Evelyn. She explained that her mother had passed away peacefully the night before. In her will, she had left a small, traditional Korean mother-of-pearl jewelry box. She had instructed it be given to the Jamaican angel who read to me, if she could be found. Evelyn opened the box when it arrived. Inside was not jewelry. It was a stack of old Korean war bonds, meticulously saved for decades, and a handwritten note in shaky Hangul. It read, "For your grandmother, thank you for sharing her with me." The bonds were worth almost nothing financially. Their value was incalculable. It was proof that the quiet, unseen love Evelyn offered had been seen and reciprocated in the purest way. It was the validation his mother's world could never give. That evening, Min Jun made a decision. He would not move back into the penthouse's master suite. He, Evelyn, and Sumin would move to a smaller, brighter home in a neighborhood with trees and a park. The Kang Empire would remain, but the Kang family would start anew on its own terms. He asked Evelyn a simple question in the new kitchen, surrounded by unpacked boxes. "Will you let me build a life with you? Not as a nanny, not as a secret, as my partner." Evelyn, holding the mother-of-pearl box, looked at him, then at Sumin drawing at the table. "On one condition," she said. "Tuesday nights, we cook together, all of us, and we invite anyone who is alone." Min Jun smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "Jerk chicken and kimchi fried rice," she said. "We are integrating." The following Tuesday, the smell of Scotch bonnets and garlic filled their new home. Sumin was setting the table. The doorbell rang. It was a courier with a single envelope, no return address. Inside was a vintage photograph of a young Madame Kang holding a baby Min Jun, smiling a smile he had never seen. On the back, in her handwriting, were just 2 words. He laughed. It was not an apology. It was a fossil of a feeling from a time before the walls went up. Min Jun placed it on the mantle, not as a forgiveness, but as a reminder of the human complexity buried beneath the legend. He then turned back to the kitchen, to the noise and the spice and the woman stirring the pot, to the daughter chattering about her day. The family he was born into had been a gilded cage. The family he was choosing was a home, built not on blood, but on the braver, messier foundation of choice. And as the Tuesday night meal began, the future, for the first time, felt light. The story of Kang Min Jun and Evelyn Grant is more than a scandal. It is a fault line. It reveals the seismic pressure building beneath the surface of traditional family structures across the globe. For generations, the contract was clear: obedience in exchange for belonging, silence in exchange for security. But what happens when the cost of belonging becomes the surrender of your own soul? What happens when the person demanding your loyalty mistakes control for love? This confrontation is playing out in millions of homes, in countless cultures, as the modern ideal of self-actualization collides with the ancient code of filial duty. It is a conflict with no easy answers, where every choice creates collateral damage. Madame Kang was not a cartoon villain. She was a product of a system that taught her that her worth was tied to her son's compliance, that love was something to be weaponized for preservation. Her tragedy was that she could not imagine a love that was not about control. Minjun's revolution was not just about choosing a woman, it was about choosing a self. He had to dismantle the identity built for him to discover the man he could become. And in doing so, he broke the cycle. Evelyn represented something neither of them had ever fully experienced: love as a free choice, offered without condition or agenda. Her strength was not in fighting for a place at the table, but in building a new one entirely with different rules. The lingering question is not who was right or wrong. It is whether any family system can survive if it does not make room for the individual heart. Can tradition evolve to include choice, or must every generation wage the same painful war? The photo on the mantle, the young mother, the laughing baby, suggests a different origin story, one before the walls went up. Hints that the rigid matriarch and the rebellious son might have found a different path in a different world. Their story is a cautionary tale and a map. It shows that the most devastating family ruptures are not about hate, but about a love that has curdled into possession. And it proves that sometimes building a true home requires first having the courage to walk out of a gilded cage. The choice to define family for yourself remains one of the most dangerous and necessary acts of love there is. If this story made you think about the lines between duty, love, and control, let us know in the comments. For more deep dives into the human dramas reshaping our world, subscribe and hit the bell. Your support allows us to keep bringing you these narratives. Until next time, choose carefully and love bravely.